Hello, and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast with me, George Brown.
And me, Chris Horn. How are you, George?
Yeah, not bad, thank you, Chris. So it feels a bit like the wind is trying to blow the roof off here in Hampshire. So if there's a sudden crash and I disappear, that's what's happened. There's been all sorts of stuff flying around the lawn. It's even blown the metal lid off the chicken food bin, which I had to chase across the lawn momentarily.
When I took the dog out at lunch, there was one of the farmers' sheds. The corrugated iron roof has been got, so like two of the nails have come out, and you know that the rest of it's just going over the course of it. And it started to go. I was just like, I say to the dog, right, come this way. Any moment we're going to die. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I didn't even know this was coming, but hey ho.
Yeah, there's just something quite undignified about a man in his late 30s chasing a dustbin lid across a lawn. Got to tell you.
You know, last one we had a few drinks the night before.
Yes.
We didn't have quite as many drinks last night, but we're on a running theme here.
Well, how are you feeling then?
No, not great, if I'm honest. But I've had a sip of beer, so I'm all right now. So we don't really plan this podcast at all, but we do plan business. And we had our strategy day yesterday for Guns on Pegs, which is very different to what we do for the pod. Nice little celebration at the end of that with the team, throwing some arrows.
Yeah, well, I was a bit more sensible than last time, and I actually made it back to Winchester. I was actually so nervous about making it back to Winchester, I left at about 6:30.
Right.
Tell us who's our guest today, Chris.
So our guest today was previously Public Affairs Manager for BASC in Scotland. He successfully represented the interests of shooting and country sports in Scottish Parliament, and we're going to get onto that because he's done that a number of times. He was jointly responsible for securing £1 million of Scottish Government funding to support country sports businesses badly impacted by COVID-19, which is no mean feat given Scotland's sort of stance on a lot of country sports over the past. He also led a high-profile campaign to highlight abuse being directed towards Scottish gamekeepers and produced the government-endorsed guidance that allowed country sports to legally take place between the old COVID lockdowns. Not only that, he is also a warfare officer in the Royal Navy Reserves, specialising in submarine operations. Now, he is a very important person at Scottish Land and Estates. So please put your hedge trimmers down and give a very warm welcome to Ross Ewing.
That was extraordinarily generous. Chris, who wrote that? It wasn't me.
You see, that's the only bit of pod planning we do.
Oh, well, very much appreciate it. And I'm very pleased to join you as well. I have listened to a few episodes of the pod, so yes, very pleased to be on it. So
it's great to have you with us, Ross. I want to know about submarines, please, before we go any further.
Yes.
Yes, unfortunately on this circuit, limited to what I can tell you, but my role doesn't actually involve going on submarines, which is actually really disappointing considering submarine operations is my area of specialism. Turns out being a submariner is actually quite a technical business, and you actually need to really know what you're doing, and probably not safe to let reservists run around operating submarines. However, we do help them to operate with aircraft carriers in particular. That's basically what my specialization does. So wherever the carrier goes, if it's going somewhere quite important and it needs a submarine escort, then we kind of look after it, shall we say, brackets, employ it, hopefully in a useful way. when it's not broken.
Yeah, that's very cool though. Very cool.
It's a fascinating world. That I find that there's been a few sort of submarine stories around Scotland, and I don't know how many of them are true. When we used to go up in the Western Isles quite a lot, and there was always things like you'd hear, or sometimes you'd see them when they go in between the little isles up towards Skye.
Yep.
And there's always like rumors, so and so happened, or they bumped into another one that was like Russian and no one knew it was supposed to be there, and all that sort of stuff. There's this like, I don't know how much of it's true, but it's fascinating. Any time someone brings it up, I'm just drawing the table listening.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some. Sadly, the Royal Navy has not covered itself in glory in some aspects of submarine operations, because there was that time that HMS Astute accidentally ran aground somewhere on the west coast of Scotland. I don't know if you remember that. That was back in...
Bumped into an island, didn't it? Yes.
Yeah, not great. And then there was also that time in the Gibraltar Strait where HMS Ambush was coming up to periscope depth and may have accidentally bumped into something. Not really sure what it was. I think it was some sort of civilian shipping, I think. But the Conning Tower was looking a little bit rough after that particular incident. So things do go wrong. I mean, they're not easy things to operate, right? And I would not like to be the one that's doing it. But we try and keep them as safe as we can and do things useful with them. from the safe comfort of an aircraft carrier, which are really cool, by the way. And yeah, good things to go and look around if you get a chance, because they're massive.
Different kind of shooting, that, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
I've always thought, though, that people with game shooting experience would probably make quite good anti-aircraft gunners. Got that understanding of lead and...
Surely it's all just automated now, isn't it?
Well, we fire a hell of a lot of rockets at things. The days of using, I suppose, anti-aircraft weaponry that you would kind of associate with World War II are probably gone. However, in recent months, I think it's HMS Diamond, actually, when she was operating in the Red Sea, I think there was a particular situation where they were obviously taking down these Houthi drones using their kind of missile systems they have on board. But I think there was some circumstances where they were actually using the kind of general purpose machine guns and other things that they have, I suppose the smaller ammunition, if you like, to actually get these things out the sky. So pretty cool.
That's like those, you can do that sort of remote control aeroplane clay shooting equivalent, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
But because there's no people in that, you can only laugh at shooting a drone down, right? Obviously, it's not really... I'm sure if someone shoots a plane out of the sky, they don't really laugh. But shooting drones down with your mates, actually having to use proper lead with a proper gun, that must be hilarious.
And you know what? If they weren't loaded potentially with quite a lot of kind of quite dangerous explosives, they probably would be like, finding it all great fun and games. I think that threat slightly sharpens the mind of some of the ship's company.
We were talking in the last episode about pressure, weren't we? That's a different kind of pressure.
Pressure on the peg.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, no, I'm sure, they've all got a newfound fascination probably for taking up game shooting when they all come back, obviously.
You get one of them that's just a lot better than the other, and they're like, where did all that come from?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
It's cool.
Very good.
Well, Chris, since you're the one who's suffering, I'm going to start with you. What's that you're drinking?
Last time I was really suffering and just went straight to a bottle of decent red. Today I needed a beer. So I have got a pretty standard it's IPA, actually. It's not lager, sorry, it's just fizzy IPA. I've got a proper job, which you kind of see everywhere, but it is quite nice. It's not, I suppose it's not everywhere, but yeah, it's St Austell Brewery, which was once in Cornwall. Do they still make it there? It is still in Cornwall.
No, well, I do think proper job is a proper beer. I think we'll let you get away with that one.
Yeah, no, it's nice. But beer, and I often go to beer, and I'm going to go to you before we go to our guest on that basis. Have you gone to whiskey? Please don't let me down, because I don't think you're putting enough effort into what's that you're drinking, George, if I'm honest.
Well, I haven't got whiskey, and that is because, as you know, I've been on antibiotics, and everybody kept telling me yesterday that it's fine to drink on antibiotics, and I did have a couple of pints of Guinness, and I wasn't terribly unwell, but I still feel like whiskey is maybe a step too far. So I've got a glass of red, which I haven't actually tried yet, but it is, and I need the bottle to say this because it's South African, so it's got a name, and it's called Pieken Iris Kloof.
Rolls off the tongue, that one.
It does, doesn't it? It's not one you're ordering from behind the bar unless you're really confident. It's a Grenache. It's well, I'll tell you, I haven't. It looks quite sort of fruity, so it is exactly that. Very light, and very nice indeed.
Good,
actually,
really nice.
Off it goes, Ross.
Sadly, because I have to go and drive to my naval unit after this podcast, I'm having some beer, but only a small amount because we have quite tight drink driving rules in Scotland. So I'm having this very small amount that you can see here. That is actually neck oil, which is one of my favourite IPAs. And yeah, I have it quite often after shooting or after beating, mainly after beating, to be honest. And I find it a very refreshing pint. And that is the reason I thought I'd bring it along today, because it's kind of my most associated with shooting activity type alcoholic beverage. So there we go.
Lovely. By Beavertown.
Yes.
You're a neck oil man, are you not, Chris?
I am. Do you know what? I nearly had one for this pod. I also have another one of their other... I bought another one that I'd never heard of before, which I wanted to try, and I'm saving that. I'll probably have that next time.
Nice.
Yeah, they do quite nice stuff. I was drinking very similar last night. I nearly chose neck oil when we were out last night, but I had Brixton Brixton do a really nice IPA, which is similar to neck oil.
I just find it really refreshing. Like, I don't know. Last summer I was in the Yorkshire Dales and it is honestly so drinkable when you've like come back from a really long hike. And I know you shouldn't probably, rehydrate on beer. However, I think this might be the exception to the rule. Like, genuinely, I think it's really, I don't know, I find it really, it's like diluting juice as far as I'm
It's
concerned in terms of its rehydration quality.
iconic sports beer. I think it's perfectly acceptable.
Exactly. Yes.
It doesn't work, but it's enjoyable.
I agree. I tell myself it does, and that.
In my year abroad at university, working in the salad fields of Spain, a lot of the old boys who were sort of old hands working in the fields there would have a bottle of lager for breakfast, and they would tell me that it was better at rehydrating you than just water, which is obviously bollocks. But
who are these scientists?
I feel like as an excuse for having beer for breakfast, it's right up there.
I agree. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we should follow the lead of our elders, and I think they are absolutely correct in that one. To be honest, why not? I mean, any excuse to have beer before 11 a.m. I'm there. So,
I mean, for breakfast, I don't know. Not even at uni. That was a push, wasn't it? Beer for breakfast is a tough one. Yeah, I think after like starting early, obviously that's different. But I think like first off in the morning,
before you've had a cup of tea.
Before you've done anything, yeah, it's just awful.
Maybe I'm sounding a bit more like a functioning alcoholic, to be honest. There we are.
No, I'm with you, Ross.
Thanks, George.
Because Chris, I think you'd have a glass of champagne for breakfast, wouldn't you? So I think you're just being snooty about what you drink.
Oh yeah, probably 100%. Have a glass of champagne, that'd be nice. But I don't know. It's just something about beer at breakfast. Having said that, it reminded me of a time we drank a case of beer before the first ski lift. That was interesting.
Yes.
One for another time.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we probably better move on. Right. So what we like to do to kick things off, Ross, is to turn to our postbag, and we begin with a segment called Whose Bird Is It Anyway? This is where we ask our listeners to write in with their shooting quandaries and queries and confessions, and we do our level best to help them out of their sticky situation, whatever that may be. This episode's Whose Bird Is It Anyway submission comes from somebody who I've decided to call Napoleon. And Napoleon has written, I'm a keen, if not particularly talented, shooter and stalker. I shoot pheasants with my local syndicate, join a few parties for a handful of driven days, and do a little recreational stalking. I've recently started dating a young lady I'm quite taken with. She's had pretty limited exposure to the world of field sports, but I was delighted when she started expressing an interest in coming out with me. Over the last few months, we managed to get her some lessons on clays and worked her up to splitting my peg on one of the driven days. She did very well, shot her first pheasants, and thoroughly enjoyed the experience. She's also joined me for a stalking trip and shot her first hill stag. She now well and truly has the bug and is itching to join me for more sport. Initially, this was delightful. A bit of company on the peg, no arguments about how I'm spending my weekends, and a charming lady to introduce to my shooting friends. But it has developed into her wanting to join me on every shoot day, every stalk, every foray for pigeons, every wander with the 2-2. For me, field sports has always been a bit of an escape from the real world, away from work emails, and one of my few chances for a little solitude. Now I'm starting to worry I'm losing that a little bit. I don't get many days in the field through a season, and even splitting a peg can feel like I'm giving up some of my own opportunities. On the other hand, all of her shooting connections and contacts are through me, and I'm not sure she'd be very comfortable going out on a shoot day without me. I've suggested she join some of the ladies' groups and syndicates that are advertised on social media, but to no avail. Now, I'm aware there are lots of sportsmen and women out there who would kill for another half who not only tolerates but encourages and participates in their hobbies. So, to preserve my good fortune, I'm in need of some guidance. How can I keep my other half happy and encourage her continued sporting journey whilst also preserving my own sport and sanity?
That's a lot.
I mean, he's emailed the wrong place, hasn't he? Talk about a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like probably sounds really awful. I'll be the bad guy in this, but I think he should just simply not tell her about some of the sporting opportunities he may or may not be embarking on,
Oh,
and just proceed. Like, I don't know what else he can possibly do. Just say he's going,
What
I
they
don't know.
don't know can't hurt them.
Well, exactly. I
I,
don't really see a solution.
I don't know if starting by lying is going to end well.
Short-term fix,
Just
long-term bad.
long term real problem. Yeah, we've had a few of those actually. People, I mean, there's quite a lot of lying that goes on in the world of field sports, isn't there? And so that's definitely come up in this segment of the pod quite a few times before in different ways. Okay, lying, option number one. I mean, you do get. I don't know about you. I've had occasional invites where it's quite carefully worded from like groups of mates from way back. This is a lads' trip, and it's and and like to some people who might have brought along another half in the past, this isn't one of those ones. We'll have another day, another point when we all get together, families and all the kids out, the rest of it, lovely. This isn't one of them, and maybe he needs to insert those words into the next invite, even if they weren't there in the first place.
I agree. We're back to lying. Excellent.
but then he's not lying. He's going out. He's just slightly adjusting. He is lying. You're right.
Yeah.
I think maybe we can do better than just lying. I think there's an important bit of information that I think is missing here, which is, does the other half have her own gun yet? Because if she doesn't, then I would suggest a few £100 on a second-hand gun will mean that you can go out and shoot some pigeons, roost shooting pigeons or whatever, and be by yourself, because she can have her own bit of woodland and you can have your own bit of woodland.
And you're selling it because you're more effective as two, aren't you?
Exactly. So this is a result of this. So not only do you get massive brownie points for the gift of the gun, but you also can then start indicating that, you could buy a peg on this day as well. Perhaps we should both join this syndicate. And then, you have pleasure each other's company at Elevenses and on the gun bus and so forth. But then when you're on your peg, it's your time.
Mm.
I think that is a strangely diplomatic solution from me there.
I reckon she'd already have her own gun, but if she's new to shooting, I think being on your own in a pigeon hide is probably one of the last things that you do. I don't know. Is that fair? I think of the difficulties in field sports, being on your own in a pigeon hide is probably top of that. But maybe if he's out, sets her up, all the rest of it says, maybe that is a good way to start. But he did say she wasn't keen on joining any of these quite big groups now of what looks like real fun syndicates of getting like-minded ladies together who are exactly in this position. I've always found it slightly odd that it has to be ladies only, but I understand that getting people in and making everyone feel super comfortable is the objective of that group, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but that obviously hasn't landed with her in this situation. I wonder why.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like you got to go along and give these things a try, right? And I don't know. I feel like she should just give it a go. And I think perhaps my advice would be quite directly encouraging to that effect and say, look, these are really good. I've heard really good things, blah, 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 and really kind of kick the arse out of it, so to speak, and see if that results in...
They're quite active at the game fair, those groups, doing one thing or another. Get maybe some personal contact with some of them first to sort of build up a bit of relationship. That would then make her feel comfortable about going, wouldn't it?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea.
I'm going to revert to another less favourable option, which is the concept of deterrence, which obviously we in the Navy know lots about because we carry the nuclear deterrent, right? I'm not saying we're escalating to a war footing here, but hear me out. So one could expose said young lady to all the slightly things that we probably now grow to love and enjoy, but good things about shooting, but some people might find, I don't know, a little bit difficult. So, for example, cleaning your gun at the end of the day. Some people don't like that. Cleaning mud off your boots, things like that. Starting to paying for going out and actually paying for the privilege of doing what it is you're doing. Because I suspect, reading between the lines here, it is the gentleman in this particular relationship that is being kind of, bearing the cost for these activities. And one could
Yes, you can share
potentially
my
deter.
peg. That'll be £500, please, darling.
I agree. Cost recovery, full cost recovery. The Scottish government do it, so why shouldn't spouses?
I suppose, and they're not married, are they? They're not. They haven't. Doesn't sound like they've been together
this
too
is
long.
a very new relationship from the sound of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if they do get married and have children, that will sort this out entirely. You could look at that.
Because just won't be able to go ever again.
Exactly. only one of you is ever going anywhere at any one time.
I like it. That's a
I'm
very
not saying
option.
straightforward to children. It ruins all time together forever. So,
I think we've got to say, hats off to this chap for realizing that he is very fortunate in this position. I've expressed on this podcast many times before how much I would like for my wife to get into salmon fishing, because I think it would open the door to more salmon fishing in the long run. It's not showing any signs of happening anytime soon, but I think count your blessings as well.
It's interesting. So, Sam, you're absolutely right. Salmon fishing, though, for some reason, I saw that slightly differently. That's wanting to go up to Scotland for a period of a few days. If she's got her own rod, you can't stand next to each other, and so you get that solitude that he's talking about. But then with shooting, standing together is often seen as something you do. Whereas with fishing, I know that your mate might sit behind you and you chat, but even then, that's not easy because you got this bit of line flying back and flies everywhere. I don't know. Yeah. It's slightly different, isn't it? And I'm exactly with you there. If your other half's in salmon fishing, you're laughing really there. It just doesn't feel quite the same as shooting.
I don't know. I feel like we could take the other approach with this, which is saying, look, this is positively a good thing. Just get on with it. You have to accept that there's going to be some burden, sadly.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. You're right to point that out. I was thinking that all along from the start, which is it's nice to have this as a complete opposite. Because, most of the arguments from mates of mine have always been the opposite of this. But it's fascinating it's gone all the way.
So have we got definitive advice here, or we just so we're saying count your blessings, keep persevering on the lady shooting groups.
Sim days, get her on some sim days with those things. Like they're fun. And it's about relationships. It's about getting into a syndicate of people that you really get along with. That's kind of what this all comes down to.
Yeah. And if all else fails, buy a gun. And if that fails, lie.
Yeah. Agreed. Well done, everyone. Problem solved. Well done, chaps.
There's more. There's got to be more in this. I'm gonna wake up on Sunday morning and be like, I've got it. This is exactly what you should do. It's really good though. Thanks for sending that in. What's also awkward is if she's that keen, she's probably listened to this on her journey to work or something. She's like, oh shit, is that me?
Well, the email did sign off with a name, and it said, "Please," then brackets, "Please, for God's sake, change this name."
Excellent. Interestingly, Napoleon is the name you went for, George. What was the inspiration for that one? Anything?
Well, so I think we've had Napoleon before in a different context. The context this time was Napoleon obviously was famous for saying "Not tonight, Josephine" with regularity.
Awesome. Love it.
Very, very good. Right, George.
Yeah.
I've been sent a letter.
Okay. That sounds bad.
He's a regular listener, and he says, "Dear George, an acquaintance of mine has recently very publicly bared his soul and shared his innermost thoughts in a faintly embarrassing manner. So much so, I can no longer look at him in the same way. The next time I see him on a peg, I'll not be able to forget the confidences he so brazenly put out there as to his thoughts and emotions as he shoots. I shall feel like a voyeur. What should I do in the face of such emoting? Philip."
Wait.
Now,
is this a stitch up?
So I think you know who Philip is.
Well, I think I do.
And I think he's referring to the last podcast where you very publicly talked in depth about what went through your mind. I mean, it was the theme of the pod, so it's okay. But Your friends have found it quite odd.
So it would appear. So just for your benefit, Ross, the previous episode we were talking about the psychology of being on the peg in terms of sports psychology and dealing with pressure and that sort of stuff. And yeah, I probably was quite honest about some of the thoughts and emotions and what have you that I have when I'm standing on the peg.
And your panics.
Yeah, panic and yeah,
nervousness.
I hadn't thought about it like that before, in terms of it being quite open and honest about it. But actually, I'm going to stand by it. I think it's important to, I think we all pretend like we all feel super confident all of the time. And I feel maybe it's right that somebody says, actually, I do get nervous. I do want to perform well. I do worry about what other people think. I think maybe that's a good thing to do. So, yeah, I don't quite know. I'm tempted to go say screw you, Philip. But what I really mean is, it's fine. Don't feel like a voyeur. I don't mind telling people. I don't mind being honest about this. I think it's important that we talk about it.
It's interesting. Philip thinks it's faintly embarrassing what you were saying. I know what he means, but as you say, it's not.
Yeah. I do feel a bit kind of put on the spot there, but
and he's no longer going to look at you in the same way. So that's the positive thing about this.
Yes, it does beg the question how he was looking at me before.
Someone of extreme confidence and prowess, and now he's going to look at you as a nervous wreck in the corner.
Yeah, but he can't possibly have thought that because he has seen me shoot.
Well, I'm kind of with you. Say exactly what you think. Say how you feel. Don't worry about it. It's not embarrassing unless Philip says so.
I think it's only embarrassing if one is embarrassed, and I'm not. And I've also decided not to be embarrassed about my shooting anymore. So I think it's all good, really, isn't it?
Philip's obviously embarrassed. It would be embarrassed if he said that. Next time you see him after the first drive, how were you feeling, Philip?
Yeah, how did that make you feel?
Lots of deep dive probing questions.
Very good. Okay, right. Let's move on, shall we? I think we've had enough of that. Next, Ross, we've got a forgotten drive. We're returning to a feature that's been on the back burner for a little while. And it's where we ask our listeners to share their memories of drives which, for whatever reason, are no longer shot. And this one comes from across the Atlantic from somebody I shall call Daffy. As an overseas listener, I've been particularly enjoying your Forgotten Drives segment and the way which it shows the culture of driven shooting in the UK, as well as some of the challenges and changes it has faced over time. I've been inspired to reflect on my own shooting background and would like to share a forgotten hunt and drive of my own. For the first several years of my shooting, the first weekend of my squad season was on a farm in Hillsdale, a county located in central southern Michigan, about a 2-hour drive southwest of Detroit. Here, we would target primarily Canada goose with decoys on a pair of ponds, but would start our days with what I realise now might be mistaken as a small drive. The ponds are immediately surrounded by a stand of white oak located amongst the rolling hills of agricultural fields common to this area, and so are very attractive to the migrant goose. Being waterfowling, we would set out well before dawn for the larger pond, located deeper in the wood, and deposit our decoys safely amongst the oak trees, a distance from the water's edge. Here they would remain until after our solitary drive made at first light. Then, all but one of the guns would position themselves in a line on the edge of a 2-track road which passed through the woods between the ponds and connected a pair of fields. Our efforts would be coordinated with the onset of legal shooting hours, at which point the gun, who remained behind, would make a short beat to the water's edge, and sometimes beyond, to jump wood ducks that could be found on the pond. The ducks would invariably cruise just inside or above the tops of the oaks, passing some 15 or 20 meters above the guns and offer a brief window for a shot as they crossed at full speed the narrow road and clearing along which the guns were stationed. At the end of the day, our bag would consist primarily of geese. However, it was the fast-paced, high-flying ducks driven at first light that would become the most memorable of the shooting in Hillsdale. Unfortunately, the annual hunt on Hillsdale Farm would ultimately come to an end as the farm's owner transitioned his interest toward leasing hunting rights for deer, something that's a relatively common trend for private land in the area, and maybe the beginnings of an unpopular opinion, but I digress. Thank you for sharing your tradition of shooting. So I think that's a really nice story, isn't it? And it's interesting that I think that kind of American culture of wildfowling is incredibly strong, but that it does have this instance at any rate has just that little element of driven shooting just to kick it all off.
That was bringing back so many memories for me of getting round. You get round the pond, don't you? Someone's going to get round the back. And by the way, we'll be out here, but you never know what's there before we get there. So someone get round the back. You guys all line up here, and we'll see if anything comes off. That's kind of like the unwritten rule, isn't it?
Agreed.
I imagine that brought back a few memories for you as well, Ross.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so much so that so my dad has bought about 80 acres, I think, of land in Perthshire, which he is turning into his retirement project. He was a GP and he's just retired, and this is what he's decided he's going to do. And one of his first acts was to create a duck pond so that exactly what has just been described can basically be relived, because we've both got a big kind of fascination with kind of wildfowling and kind of wild duck shooting, and exactly those sort of things that you do to ensure that you make the most of any outing. I just think are brilliant. So yeah, that was really nice. Your listeners, by the way, write really good prose, don't they? Like really, they write really well.
They do.
That's no pressure to someone else who wants to write in, by the way, please.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's really enjoyable hearing it, isn't it? It's interesting though, because if you're out flighting, that's a skill in its own right. Mm-hmm. Putting yourself in the right position, doing all the right stuff. This, getting round the ducks, is different. It's like a different skill required to make the whole thing work, isn't it? And maybe that's why everyone sort of remembers it and talks about it.
Well, and do you think that this tradition of the guys all lining out on the road and one person going around to jump the duck? I think jumping ducks is a great verb, by the way. I really approve of that. Presumably, what happened is the first time they went, or early on in their trips to this place, they just sort of blundered up onto the pond, and all these ducks disappeared in every direction. And then after the sort of wash up meeting in the pub or whatever afterwards, presumably breakfast afterwards, they've gone, next time we should try and get round them, and let's see if we stand here, and how many efforts it took to work out where the best place to stand was, which direction to push them, etc. I'd love to know the full story of that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those. It's that innate hunter-gatherer thing, which is, if you're arriving there, I wouldn't even think twice about, don't slam the car door. That whole sort of like, just, we're getting out, like, and you immediately go into mode, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, you know what you're doing, and it just happens.
But you're absolutely, that sort of shooting, I think, has the total like post-match analysis that always takes place. And, like, a classic example of us as humans habituating. I think that's a good word. There you go, habituating to what's actually happening when you arrive on the ground. I think it's brilliant, really, really good, and sad that for this particular listener, no longer a thing. But it is what it is. It sounds like he or she has got great memories of it.
We were on a day, must have been the season before last, group of mates. He's probably listened to this, the guy who did this actually. But we were on a walk around day at the end of January, and we got to the part where, like, right, we're going to get round this pond. There should be a few teal on there. We knew where we're going. We sort of assessed the wind, right, here and here. You go out on that flank and so on. One of you will go around the back. Basically did exactly this. We got ourselves into position. As you get yourselves into position, usually something moves from one of you getting into position. In this case, it was a woodcock. And this particular person, who's a friend of mine, on the left flank, bang, off on the woodcock. None of us were ready. And obviously that made all of the teal on the pond go the other way. And no joke, like 30, 40 teal. I honestly nearly shot the guy. I was like, what are you doing?
But hang on, you've missed out an important bit of the story here. Did he kill the woodcock?
I don't actually think he did. And I think he claimed he did as well, which made it worse.
So did he then have you all looking for it for 40 minutes as well?
I couldn't even speak to him for about 2 hours after. I was like, I can't believe what you've just done. You know better. You shoot a lot. You know better than most. And what were you thinking? Like, we all worked our way up there. We'd especially not gone to that area to make sure it was. Anyway,
you're still hurting, aren't you?
Well, there was like 30, 40 teal on this. It would have been absolutely incredible. Obviously, you're only going to get 2 shots because they're gone pretty much. But You don't find yourself in that position very often.
No. Good. Right. Well, I thank you very much for that. So, Napoleon, Daffy, and now you, Ross, are the newest members of the most noble order of the Garters and will very soon be in receipt of a set of the highly coveted Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters. If you two have got a shooting confession, quandary, or a query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or if you'd like to share an unpopular opinion or let us know about a drive with a good name or a forgotten drive, and you would like a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com.
If the Philip who wrote in is the Philip I think it is, he's already got a set of garters, hasn't he?
Correct. I might revoke them.
Excellent.
Ceremonially burn them in front of him.
Good. Right. Ross, I'm really excited to talk to you about something that's happened recently. I'm sure you're bored to death of talking about this. But the beauty of the podcast is it goes out to lots of people who will listen to it. And I think this is such an interesting, important thing that you've been involved with. So there's just been a big vote in Scottish Parliament, Holyrood, on grouse shooting. Go for a quick overview, if you could, please.
Yeah, sure. So we have, for the last year and probably a year before that as well, been kind of dealing with a bill called the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Bill. It is the piece of legislation that will ultimately, later on this year, license grouse shooting in Scotland. So pretty seismic in terms of what it's going to do. It's going to do some other things as well. So it's going to license Muirburn, license the use of some wildlife traps, and it's going to ban snares and give the Scottish SPCA enhanced powers to investigate wildlife crime. So it's a pretty broad brush piece of wildlife management legislation. But we, my organisation I work for, Scottish Land and Estates, have been very much involved in kind of making the representations on this because regulation we always kind of knew in respect to grouse shooting was probably going to be forthcoming and on the cards, and we kind of decided a number of years ago, kind of a select group of more owners came together to basically ask the question, how can we make ourselves ready for this, how can we make regulation work, because it's coming. And that is when myself and one of my esteemed colleagues, Ashley McCann, who definitely gets a shout out, and I'll be sending her the link to this on completion, we got involved to basically kind of lead on Scottish Land and Estates' efforts when it comes to tackling grouse shoot licensing. So it is going to license the activity that is the shooting of grouse. That is what it's going to do from probably from the 12th of August this year.
And so that's the estate that's licensed, is it? Or the landowner? Who has to have the license?
So the person that holds the license will be the person that has the sporting right to shoot grouse, so landowner or a sporting tenant if the sporting rights are assigned under the terms of a lease, and then it will apply to the land over which those sporting rights are exercised, basically.
So this is a fascinating point because when you just framed that, it sounded, everything instantly is like, oh my God, this is a disaster. You've got snares, licensing, just interference left, right, and centre.
Yep.
Which everyone in an ideal world would just want to go nowhere near.
Yeah, so I think you make a really good point on that, though, because regulation is scary, like 100%. But we've known in Scotland, probably since 2017, when the Scottish government kind of first mentioned this concept of licensing, they commissioned an independent review to look at the possibility of licensing grouse shooting businesses. So we've known since 2017 that this is probably going to be on the cards.
Is that the Werity report? Is that the one?
Yeah, so it preceded the Werity report. So the thing that happened before the Werity report was there was a big report into the fate of satellite tagged golden eagles in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland, found that a third disappeared in suspicious circumstances on or near grouse moors, and then the Werity review happened after that. And within the scope of that review, Scottish ministers said, we want you to look specifically at the option of licensing grouse shooting.
Yeah, so and the context is crucial to this because most shooting people would be like, no, this is awful, fight like mad, which obviously you did, but the context is crucial because you're not going to get it to go away.
Correct.
And that, I think, is your starting point. You knew, I mean, no, we all know Scottish politics. Like, it wasn't going to go away.
No.
I imagine your game is to deal with it as best you can.
Exactly that, and that's what we set out to do. And the group of moor owners and sporting agents that came together to kind of get us ready for this understood that point. They accepted that licensing was coming and it would be coming down the track. A big part of my job over the last couple of years has been bringing people with us. So the amount of time, and I've done it over the last couple of weeks, obviously because we had the bill now and we know what it looks like. Has been briefing, in village halls in areas that have got a fairly strong grouse shooting footprint, keepers and shepherds and other land managers about what the bill is actually going to do. So they have been involved every step of the way, obviously on top of us briefing kind of, the people that actually own land in Scotland. So it has been a bit of a collective effort to kind of, bring people with us. And it's been our journey to do that. And, not everyone, certainly right at the start, agreed that, that we should be even accepting this. But I think we've got ourselves to a place now that people can see the piece of legislation that we're working with. And I tell you, when it was first introduced to the Scottish Parliament, there were issues with it, like really big issues. The notion was there actually that somebody could suspend Scotland's nature agency could suspend somebody's grouse shooting license without proof of criminality. So they were saying if an investigation was ongoing, we could suspend your license. And we said, in response to that, quite rightly, that is a huge. What you're talking about there is a huge implication. You need to have strong evidence if you're going to be suspending or revoking somebody's ability to shoot grouse, because there are so many socioeconomic implications that hang on it. And thankfully, I don't give the Scottish government a lot of credit for things, obviously, because I work in the wildlife management space. But on this issue, they have brought forward a lot of amendments that we've been asking for. I think one of the reasons they've done that is because we've thrown a lot of resource at this problem. We've got legal opinion, we've got kind of quite a strong, good network within the kind of public affairs space, so with MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. But to give the government some credit, they have made some changes to the bill that ultimately, and touch wood, will make this thing workable.
So yeah, so as you're saying, that the devil with these things is always in the detail. So some of the amendments that you've managed to get onto this bill, then obviously it sounds like you've managed to get that burden of proof aspect changed. So where does that now sit? What happens if they do want to revoke a license? What do they have to have in terms of evidence?
So there's three tests that need to be satisfied in order to suspend or revoke somebody's license to shoot grouse. So the first thing is that a relevant offence has to be committed. The second thing is that relevant offence has to be committed on the land to which the license relates, and the third, it has to be committed by the license holder or someone managing the land. So there's three things that Nature Scott need to be satisfied of unequivocally to the civil burden of proof in order to suspend someone's license. And only in that point could they step in and actually say, yep, we're going to suspend or we're going to revoke. And even then, if you are in the position that you actually think, I don't agree with Nature Scott's decision because of X, Y, or Z, you've actually got the capacity to appeal, but not appeal back to Nature Scott like most licensing frameworks. You can actually appeal to a court of law. So you can go to the sheriff court that we have in Scotland and basically ask the sheriff to make the decision again. So Nature Scott, for the first time, are going to have a degree of third party arbitration in respect of their decision making. And that is a huge change to what has gone before, because one of the big criticisms about regulatory frameworks that Nature Scott preside over is that they are, and this has been kind of the terminology that's quoted back to us by members, they are judge, jury, and executioner. And it's like, how
Yeah.
can we actually rebalance the power books here? So, to give Scottish ministers credit, that was one of our key asks before the bill was introduced. That came in the bill, which is great. And as I say, it's a fairly relatively high bar now that Nature Scott needs to cross to suspend or revoke someone's license.
How do you feel about all of this? And two-part question: how do you think the moor owners and managers and leaseholders are feeling now?
Really good question. I'll take them in reverse. So I think more owners and managers, I think, don't. No one wants this, right? Nobody wants licensing. No one wants regulation. Of course not. But they know what we started with and what we've ended
Yeah.
up with. And I think people recognize that it could have been a heck of a lot worse. We're talking about, recognition at the highest level of government in Scotland. So, ministers in the Scottish government recognizing the attributes of grouse shooting, on the record saying licenses should be granted as a matter of course. It's going to be a minority of operators that will be subjected to this licensing sanction. So, we've got a lot of positives there. One thing that I know that people are really happy about is there are legal safeguards in this scheme. So, Nature Scott can only act, in the case of a pretty dead cert case of something having gone wrong. And even then, they have a strong right to appeal if they think they've been sabotaged. So there's a degree, I think, of relief, I think is probably how I'd summarize it, from kind of a Grouse moor owner, Grouse moor manager point of view. From our point of view, I think we also feel a bit of relief because government, thankfully, listen to our representations. But, in a way, the hard work really starts now. And I know that might seem a bit perverse because we've just come through the parliamentary process, but we need to make sure now that Nature Scott implement this the way that the bill is the way the bill is written, and that's really, really important because everyone thinks that the law is a very black and white thing, and to most extent it is, I suppose, but there is, potentially room for interpretation, and we know unequivocally what the bill says and what it should be.
Because this is fascinating. Relief is a really interesting word because what that essentially says to me is, right, this was going to happen, and actually we've kind of got what we wanted on the basis that it was going to happen. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they are. Yeah, they don't want it, but they're relieved with what we've got. 100%.
And because shooting or the management of shooting has essentially been licensed, and you've now got a framework in which you can operate, it's actually been accepted then by government.
Oh, 100%.
And it's now got a structure in which it can operate. And if you want to attack that shooting, you now have to attack a legalized and formalized structure before you can stop it.
You're absolutely right.
Well, the really interesting thing about that is it takes emotion out of it, doesn't it? It takes I want this to stop because I don't like it out of it. And it then becomes a different set of questions and a different conversation that needs to take place.
Which is brilliant.
So I know Chris, we normally do unpopular opinions earlier on in a podcast, but I've got an unpopular opinion that I'm pretty certain will result in more emails like Philip's earlier. But and Ross, you said, nobody wants regulation. I think about the future of shooting, and I see it as pretty much, and I'm talking about it, I suppose, in England here, because I suppose it is a devolved issue, isn't it? But I see it as pretty much only having a future if regulation happens. We made a pretty good fist of having a go at self-regulation, but it seems that getting the sort of the weight of numbers getting involved in that process in shooting in England, involved in that self-regulation process is so difficult, and I feel like sooner or later that's going to be used as a stick to bash shooting with. And my position would be very similar to the one that you guys have taken, which is it is inevitable that regulation will happen. So let's get ahead of the curve, ahead of the game, and start trying to shape what we want that regulation to look like, even before anybody has commissioned any sort of report or is started thinking about drafting any laws, because that way we can be in that conversation to be seen to be driving it and leading it, rather than fighting against something which is imposed upon us. So that's my unpopular opinion, which I'm absolutely certain a lot of people listening will want to throttle me for saying.
But just before, and I want Ross's opinion on what you said, but actually, on the basis that we have gone full steam ahead with self-regulation, it's not actually that unpopular, in a sense that there were lots of people that have gone through a shoot audit, because we have to demonstrate what we do. Otherwise, this is coming. You can't get away with just doing whatever you like on the UK's countryside forever. That's so past. It just doesn't. It's not going to be like that forever. So we have to be able to demonstrate. So that requires a framework. What you're saying really is the question comes down to who manages that framework. Well, if you've got a framework that you've started, knowing what we know about government finances, they'll take that framework rather than start their own one. Yeah, because that's a lot less expensive. So that's why we should do self-regulation. But what you're kind of saying is, well, look, it's happening anyway. Let's just start a bloody conversation and make it happen the way we want to.
Yeah,
I think
exactly. I think self-regulation is great, and I encourage it, and I encourage all shoots and everybody who shoots to get behind that as a concept. My suspicion is that at some point in the next 10, 20 years, that will cease to be enough, and that those who don't,
Five, I'll go for.
yeah.
No,
So
maybe
why
three.
not? Why not just accept that fact and start thinking about what we'd like that regulation to look like when it does happen?
I think the points you both raised are really, really actually hugely topical, obviously. But you know what? If I was a government that potentially wanted to regulate game shooting, I think the first thing that I would do now is look to what's happened in Scotland. This is the weird way devolved politics works.
Yeah.
They go to who's addressed this issue, who's had a go, and then they'll look at that scheme and probably copy quite a lot of it, maybe not in its entirety, but they'll certainly use it as a blueprint for what comes next. And although the scheme in Scotland we've got isn't perfect, there are definitely things I think could be improved with it, but it's pretty sound as a regulatory framework. And the other thing about it, which is really, really interesting, is that ministers have given themselves the enabling powers to add other game birds to this licensing scheme in the future. So they're already looking at, would it be appropriate, for example, for a pheasant, red-legged partridge to be added to this regulatory framework? So I think it's one of those, and because of the way that they're not licensing the rearing and release of game birds, the license activity in the context of this licensing scheme is the shooting of the game birds on this particular part of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which they've created through this bill. And actually, that as a deterrent is hugely significant because stopping your ability to shoot is ultimately what underpins these activities, right? So I think it is a very astute regulatory framework in that sense, and it will be really interesting to see if ministers do add other birds to it in the future. But my personal view, and I know there's been kind of moves in this direction down in England and indeed in Wales, but licensing the rear and release of game birds, I think is the wrong way to do it. I think it gives the regulator too much power, and it's not a subjective, it's not an objective subject. Whereas the licensing of a proprietorial right, by comparison, is much more objective as an activity. It's much more simple to operate.
And to play devil's advocate to my own unpopular opinion, the counter argument to all of this is people think of any form of licensing as the thin end of the wedge. And they go, well, once you've got one bit of legislation, it's much easier to change that legislation further down the line. I suppose that is true up to a point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good observation as well. The one thing we've pushed for with this bill, and we managed to get an amendment to this effect in at stage 3, but we really want its provisions, the effectiveness of its provisions, to be assessed. So we want to see, is this actually doing the job that Scottish ministers want it to do? But I think you're right. I mean, I think there's always a risk when something is licensed. Is it a precursor to a ban? In some cases possibly that is the case, but actually if you look at a lot of other licensed activities, it's often the thing that safeguards its future, subject to everyone being broadly content that it's doing the job, to tackle, I suppose, in this case, the minority of operators that are engaging in illicit activity. So as long as those minority of operators are being tackled through this licensing framework, which I've got no doubt will happen, if people do choose to flagrantly disobey the law, then it will do its job. And that's the important thing in all of this. At the end of the day, it's got to be meaningful. It's got to have teeth. That is the reality. There has to be. It has to be able to be used.
That's what everyone said about the BGA license assurance scheme, which is now aimed to sustain assurance scheme. It doesn't have teeth, because all they wanted to do, like most people in shooting, just wanted a bad shoot to be hung out to dry. And they were just like, go and do this. And obviously that's so much more tricky than it seems because of the legal ramifications of doing so. And when in a sense of self-regulation, hanging someone out to dry is really just sort of a public flogging. It's nothing else. There's no legal. It's just, you're a bad boy. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
And we sort of will shun you, as it were. And that was never really going to work. And I think that the situation here is when we know that there are one or two bad eggs out there. When one of those bad eggs does something silly, like, the full force of the law needs to go their way, because they are the ones that have put us in this situation in the first place.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I found so incredibly frustrating is that particularly I think in cases of raptor persecution, which seems to be the biggest stick that anybody against shooting has got to hit us with. What can the organizations who support and defend shooting in the corridors of power, what can they say or do? They can't do anything. They can say, well, we condemn this wholeheartedly, put out a statement. It doesn't achieve anything. And actually, I'm now pleased that people who do those sort of things, and as you say, hopefully it's a very small proportion, but that there is now some sort of recourse that should act as some sort of disincentive to do those things.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no bigger disincentive, and people are acutely aware of this. This will absolutely sharpen people's minds I think, genuinely in a positive way. It does need, to happen in order for this to be effective, and I think it will do that job. But I think, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think, as I say, going back to kind of the regulation point, it became inevitable to us that this was going to happen. I think we are very close in the English context to finding out whether regulation is going to be inevitable. I think the incoming, if it is an incoming Labour government, which I think, I was listening to a poll today saying it's 99% certain now or something like that. But I think if and when Labour nail their colours to the mast on this issue, I think the shooting sector in the UK is going to have to think really, really carefully at that point, because there's two options as I see it. There's, resist, 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 and shout really loudly when you're doing it. Or there's, right, let's start having backroom conversations with Natural England, civil servants, special advisors in the first instance, to try and lay the groundwork, because ultimately these are the people that ministers will go to in the first instance to say, how should we do this? And actually, one of the experiences we found is that doing a lot of work with Nature Scot and Scottish Government officials prior to this bill coming to fruition was absolutely the way to kind of get critical safeguards in there, like that right to appeal that I mentioned earlier.
A question that's come to my mind, which I imagine others are thinking of, is how easy is it to get a license, and can they? I know that this was discussed actually when the Welsh government were talking about licensing game shooting in Wales. Well, they still are obviously, but they got kicked down the road for a year. Everyone was like, "Oh, all they'll do is just make it basically impossible to get a license. You apply, and then 9 months later, you get an out of office type thing." Like, what's the situation with that?
I mean, it's going to be so easy, akin to registering for something. So name and address of the license holder, map of the land holding. That's pretty much it. If Nature Scot have got any additional questions for you because they have reason to doubt, your trust and confidence, then they can ask those questions. But the reality is, and they've been very clear with us, and it's on the record in the Scottish Parliament, licenses will be granted as a matter of course. That is where we're at. So,
So it's sort of similar to a shotgun certificate in that regard, which is you sort of have a right to it unless there is a reason for you not to have it.
But that's a perfect example, which, because everyone knows at the moment, how long does it take to get a shotgun certificate? And suddenly the whole shoot can't operate that year, for example. Have they put any timescale on it?
Yeah, so we know the licensing is going to come to fruition just before the end of June. So I'm reading a couple of things into that. We know it's going to be an online application process, so you literally put in these details. I'm expecting people's licenses to be returned to them, obviously within a matter of weeks, because clearly the 12th of August and the end of June are just over a month apart from one another. So I think Nature Scot are looking at this as, people literally register, you get your license straight back. And to give Nature Scot a bit of credit, there have been issues with their licensing functions, but they do appear to be starting to actually invest in their licensing functions now. But the reality is, the way I envisage it working is, applicant applies for his or her license. Nature Scot receive it. If they've got no, they'll look at who's applied. If they've got no questions or issues that they want to, ask some further questions about, the license goes straight back to them.
If a landowner applies and let's say they got refused, or let's say they had their license revoked through something illegal,
Yeah.
If they sold the estate, would the new estate owner be able to just get a license straight away?
Yeah, it's a different, assuming it's a different operation, which it would be.
Yeah.
You're a different license holder at the end of the day. So yes, you would get your license is what our working assumption is on that one. It wouldn't be fair, proportionate, or lawful for them to continue
Unless it was the same head, unless it was the same head keeper or something. I
No,
imagine.
I think even then, I think they need to be quite careful about how they apply the law there, because actually, you could. There's no suggestion that necessarily the head keeper was the one involved in criminal activity. Do you know what I mean? This is the the challenge
Yeah.
that we've got. And bearing in mind, one of the central things that underpin the licensing scheme as it stands is Nature Scott do have to be able to link the relevant offence on the land to a relevant person. So they've got to have a good idea as to who's done it. And I think if said relevant person had gone when the new landowner takes over, I think you've got a very good chance of getting your license.
So, how kind or favourable do you think Nature Scott are versus Natural England?
Oh,
So
that's a good question.
I've never experienced natural England, so I can't really draw a direct comparison. But what I can say is Nature Scott are pretty good. They do have their issues. Don't get me wrong.
I can say that Natural England aren't that great.
Okay, well there we go.
Chris, these are the people we need on our side. Stop saying.
I mean, look, GL43 during the whole pigeon thing, that they absolutely messed up beyond belief, and they've just messed up again in delaying the license for the release of game birds within 500 meters of an SBA. It's now come out only a week ago or beginning of this week, but I'm not full of confidence in them. So that's and what I'm getting at with that question is, this seems weirdly positive in a funny way.
Yep.
But the idea of this happening down south, I don't know.
I think you make a really good observation. I mean, if I had to give, I think, the shooting community in England a piece of advice, it would be, I completely accept that Natural England right now might be a difficult entity to deal with. We need to fix that. So somebody is going to have to start building bridges in a really meaningful way with Natural England. That is beyond doubt. We've been lucky in Scotland that we've always kind of had pretty conducive relationships. Don't get me wrong, we've had robust conversations, but there's always been that kind of mutual understanding and respect. And I don't think that is at all insurmountable in England. I really, really don't. I think it's going to take a lot of time and effort, and I mean that at the grassroots level. People that are actually applying for licenses from these people need to, be on a real kind of charm offensive and, be willing to engage and work with them and things like that. But we do 100% need to probably improve our relationships with our regulators across the board. They are going to be playing an enhanced role in the future, probably whether we like it or not. And therefore, it rather is in our interests, I think, to make sure we're as on the same page as possible as them.
Mm-hmm. How many hours have you spent on this?
Let's not even go there. I mean, it's been the best part of my life the last 2 years. I joined SLE. It's been, and because it's been in the political domain as well, you are at the beck and call of MSPs, of civil servants, of ministers, the amount of stuff that we've pumped out, the amount of representations we've made, the amount of evidence that we've given. I mean, the stats are nuts, but we're talking thousands of words of evidence applied, there must be God knows how many minutes we've engaged overall, but it's been a really mammoth effort. But as I say, in a way, it kind of gets really important now because we're now in the implementation phase. This is where the crunch point is, as far as I'm concerned. The bill was obviously very important, and the political process is always a bit exciting, and we love it. But this is where it really starts to happen. Nature's Scott going to take this thing and turn it into something workable.
Well, I honestly, I think all of the shooting community need owes something to you and your colleagues, and the donors, obviously, that you pulled together to do that legal funding and all that sort of stuff. Because, as you say, this could have gone so much worse, and actually, there are elements of positivity in this.
Absolutely.
Even though, of course, we don't want regulation ideally, but let's face it, this isn't going away. So well done for managing it in the direction that you've done. Yeah. I mean, because if this becomes a precedent that Wales use next, let's be honest, that's most likely, and then England. And if your work now has created the foundation on which that is then moved forward, then yeah, clap, well done.
Thanks, guys. No, I appreciate it. It's been a big effort, and it will continue now. So not going away, which is good.
Yeah. Well, let's see. It's going to be fascinating. I do want to hear from you in July when those licenses become available. I think obviously you're going to be talking about it you're pretty active on Twitter, aren't you?
Yeah.
Or what do they say now? What do you have to say?
X,
formerly Twitter, formerly Twitter or something.
The artist formerly known as Elon.
Go and find Ross Ewing on that platform. and we'll keep in touch that way on what's happening.
Awesome.
So, Ross, the way that we like to end these pods, as I'm sure you're probably well aware, is with our segment we call Desert Island Shooting, which is a scenario where the extinction level asteroid hits tomorrow. Your affairs are in order, though. All your loved ones and enemies are reconciled. Your dogs are fed and your tomatoes are watered. Your last day shooting begins how?
Oh my God. Right. So this is a weird one. Okay. I have always wanted to shoot clay pigeons on the aircraft carrier on the flight deck because it's massive. And I've always thought this is a prime space to do something really useful aside from launching very capable aircraft into the sky. And actually, what better than to have and set up, so picture this, a clay pigeon shooting ground on His Majesty's flagship aircraft carrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth. What do you think?
Nice.
Would you do it?
That's amazing.
100%. It'd be great fun, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I mean, so the thing is, it would go against everything. I mean, honestly, there'll be, aircraft engineering officers listening to this, hopefully, right? That will be looking at this with absolute trepidation because FOD, which is foreign object debris, on an aircraft carrier is like hated more than hell itself by these people, right? That operate aircraft for obvious reasons. You may have seen, in fact, that when it was when the carrier did her big deployment around the world in 2021, someone accidentally left one of the engine caps on an F-35 Lightning B when they were trying to launch it off the ski jump on the end. So obviously it went a bit flop when it went off and crashed into the sea and the pilot ejected, and it was all fine. He was okay. But FOD, that is why FOD is hated. So I don't anticipate this ever being possible. However, I think it's a great idea and it should happen when we retire the aircraft carriers in 50 years.
What a great idea. And what sort of a setup would you like to have? Do you want a skeet setup? Do you want rabbits? What are we talking?
It's so big, we could do it all. And I mean that. Everything. Yeah. Everything you ever
want.
That's
where I was going with this.
So take Bisley or somewhere like that and shove it on a flight deck. We could do the whole thing. It would be, honestly, I think it would be the best thing ever. So if the aircraft carrier ever comes up for sale and I happen to find myself in a suitably, fruitful financial position, I will purchase.
Yeah, but how much? How much are we talking?
She cost £3 billion to build. Now she will not be worth that at the end. I know, is that it exactly? But I think it would be well worth doing. I don't know. It's just great space, and to do it from at sea, you could have a mobile shooting ground. Is that not a great idea? Like,
cool. I mean, even better then. So what you could do is park it under a cliff and have some really high birds off the cliff.
Exceptional.
Springing teals emerging from below deck.
Yeah. Yes, I
like that.
Well, they have this massive lift right in the middle of the flight deck, which you can take aircraft down to put in a hangar. So it's perfect for springing teals. Absolutely spot on.
But also, that is your cliff. You just stand downstairs.
Agreed. I mean, there's so many options with it. And of course, it has these two big, massive islands. So one's the bridge at the front and the other bit's like the air traffic control tower at the back. And I just think, you could launch some hellish targets off that, couldn't you? And I don't know. I'm really wedded to this idea that if the carriers are to do something useful when they retire, other than maybe selling it to the Brazilian Navy or something like that, we probably want to retain it and make a really big shooting ground and then tour it round.
I think I know what your next political campaign needs to be. Stop selling old gear to developing countries. And keep them and turn them into shooting grounds. I think that's perfect.
Yep. I mean, yeah, I agree. So anyway,
how long is it?
Oh God, that's a good question. I actually don't know, and I probably should know as a naval officer the answer to that question.
But I imagine a rifle range is pretty attractive on one of those.
Great backstop because you've got the ski jump at one end, so the backstop's already.
It's just going to ping up in the air.
Well, it's just yeah, possibly. But it's a no-brainer. Got to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it. We've definitely not had that before.
No. Our record keepers will be thrilled, Chris.
Yes, they will. I can't wait for that.
Great. Well, Ross, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers, Ross. Thank you, and well done.
All that remains for me to say is that there is a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sharing your unpopular opinions, your forgotten drives, your drive names. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode and another special guest. But until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.